Welcome to New View Advice with Amanda DeRocher. Hey, beautiful soul. My name is Amanda DeRocher, and this is New View Advice. If you're new here, this is a healing-centered advice podcast where I offer guidance for the healing journey. I don't believe I have all the answers you seek. I believe you have all the answers. You just may need a new view and a little help along the way. Thank you so much for joining me for today's episode. Today, I'm answering a listener question from someone who has struggled over the past couple of years, and they're finding things to be going well in their life. And they're finding that this is actually quite difficult for them, that they have the fear of things being too good to be true, the fear of everything falling apart, and they're having trouble enjoying the moment and being present. Instead, they're struggling with a lot of anxiety, overwhelm, and fear. And I love this question because I think we can all relate to this. And I think it's one of the most fascinating things about humans is that we struggle to be happy. We actually get really triggered when we're happy. And happiness and peace and a period of calm can be really triggering to us rather than a time of enjoyment. And so I think this is such a great question that so many people can relate to. And in this episode, we're going to talk about why do we struggle with the idea of things being too good to be true rather than enjoying the moment. And we're also going to talk about ways to begin navigating these difficult feelings that arise and how we can begin to reassure ourselves that it's safe to be where we're at in the present moment and how we can begin to alleviate those fears of the future. So with that, I'm excited to jump into this question. But before we do, I always like to mention that if you haven't already, I invite you to check out my website, newviewadvice.com, where you can find more free resources for the healing journey. This includes journal prompts, meditations. I have another series called Reflections, and I have poems and just a bunch of stuff on there to assist people on the healing journey and to help people to feel less alone. And also on my website, you'll be able to find today's episode show notes at newviewadvice.com/121. And with that, let's jump on into discussing why do we fear when things seem too good to be true? Hi, Amanda. I recently came across your podcast and I can't stop binging it. I'm so grateful for the work you do. It's already been incredibly helpful to me. I have a question. Since the COVID-19 pandemic, my life has taken some unexpected turns. To put it simply, it's been a rough ride. I lost my job, had to move back in with my parents, and unfortunately, I lost touch with a lot of friends over the last few years. To be honest, it was a really tough time for me. During that period, I began focusing on my healing. I've made significant progress, and I'm definitely a different person now, but I still struggle with a lot of anxiety. In the last few months, things have started to shift for me. I found a job I really enjoy. I was finally able to move out of my parents' house, and I've started meeting new people who make me feel like I can truly be myself. It sounds great, right? But here's the problem. I'm finding it harder than I expected. I'm overwhelmed with anxiety, constantly waiting for everything to fall apart. It's like I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop. I find myself playing out worst-case scenarios in my head, and I often feel like everything I've worked for could be taken away from me at any moment. Deep down, I know it's not true, but I also know life can be unpredictable, and that terrifies me. I thought I'd feel happy now, but instead I just feel fearful and anxious. Any advice on how to navigate this? Thank you for your question. As I mentioned in the intro, I think this is such a great question that so many people can relate to. I also want to say thank you so much for your kind words about the podcast. I'm so grateful you found it and that it has been something that you have found bingeable. That's kind of a funny thing for me to hear because, not gonna lie, I don't think I can binge my own podcast. So I'm like, props to you. Thank you so much for listening. I really, really, really appreciate it. But with that, let's talk about your question. I think this is a great question. I actually had to think a lot about this question because I thought it was really interesting how you mentioned the COVID-19 pandemic in your question, because I have thought about how much that impacted us, but I actually think that might be a real thing that's playing into your question here. Because you mentioned in your question that you also know life can be unpredictable and that terrifies you. And it sounds like when the COVID-19 pandemic happened, when the shutdowns happened, I'm not sure what happened in your personal life, but it sounds like there was likely a fear of the unpredictable happening. And now you're in a place in your life where you're finally getting back on your feet. And that's such a beautiful thing. I want to say that's amazing. I'm so happy for you. I'm so happy that you have been able to rebuild your life in some ways because it sounds like a lot of things fell apart at one point in your life. And I think it's beautiful that you haven't let that knock you down and that you've actually been building your life from scratch in a way, right? You got a new job, you are making new friends, you were able to leave your parents' house for what I'm guessing is the second time. You left after childhood and then you moved back and now you got to leave again. So I just want to say that to me, that's amazing that you were able to lift yourself back up. I think it shows your resilience and your strength that you're able to overcome challenging times. And I think that's such a part of life. perseverance, showing up when it's hard and just continuing to push forward and to move forward in different ways. And I think that we forget that sometimes. We think life is supposed to follow the roadmap that our minds want it to follow. And as you mentioned, life's unpredictable. And I think that's what makes life interesting, but it's also what makes life terrifying. You mentioned struggling with anxiety, overwhelm, and fear. Those make a lot of sense to me here. You went through a very difficult time, and it sounds like you did a lot of inner work, a lot of healing. Again, that's a beautiful thing to have spent those years doing. Not everybody does that. Not everybody chooses to grow. Not everybody chooses a growth mindset when things become challenging. It sounds to me like you were hit with difficult times and you were able to create good from that. That's what I view it as when we choose to heal. We begin to look within, we begin to become friends with our emotions, we begin to get to know ourselves. That is creating beauty from difficulty. Many people come across the healing journey from a difficult time. I haven't met a single person in my entire life who began healing because their life was so good. I just haven't. I think that would be cool that you're like, oh my God, my life's so good. I just want to heal. That doesn't tend to be the case. People come to healing and inner work when something difficult often happens externally and they're not able to solve it externally. So the answer becomes an internal answer. And I mentioned that because that sounds like the case for you. You've started healing when you were going through these really difficult times. And so now that you're stepping out of what I view as the cocoon, I mention it a lot, but I view the healing journey like the journey of a caterpillar to a butterfly, where we're often a caterpillar and we're going about life. And then something happens in our external life, and oftentimes we decide to go into that cocoon. And when we go into the cocoon, we change. It's a metamorphosis period. And we break down entirely. And when it comes to the healing journey, we look within, we begin to become aware of who we are, how we got here. We look at childhood patterns, we look at present day patterns, we look at our relationships, and we begin to heal. But then there becomes a day when we need to take that new version of ourselves and bring them out into the world. And that's the journey of becoming the butterfly, where we choose to share this version of ourselves with the world. And we go through this process multiple times. But when we're in the process of taking all that inner work and that metamorphosis and sharing it with the world, we are like opening a cocoon and becoming a butterfly. And that process is very uncomfortable. And that sounds to me like what you're currently navigating. Because when we fear things being too good to be true, it's often because we're hitting what Gay Hendricks calls in the book, The Big Leap, which I do recommend for you. I'm not going to give a synopsis of the book, but in this book, he talks about how humans hit their upper limit problem. So we have a capacity for how good things can be. And we can continually increase this ability for things to be good, but actually because of the way we have evolved over time and our survival mode mechanisms, we actually hit an upper limit, an amount of goodness we're willing to tolerate. And it takes awareness and growth in order to stretch that to more and more goodness in our life. But when we hit that upper limit, it often triggers feelings like you're talking about, anxiety, overwhelm, and fear. Because why we have that upper limit, as Gay Hendricks calls it, or why we have that capacity for things to be good, why we can get triggered by goodness, is truthfully because the past has shown us different. And we're living in the past still. We're using the past to tell us that things won't be good now because we're looking back at the past for all the times that things didn't go well, all the times those shoes dropped, as you mentioned in your question, all those times things fell apart. And we do this because we're trying to remain safe. And so when things get good and when things get better and better, that is uncharted territory. And it so often triggers within us that fear of things not feeling safe. And for emotionally wounded people and people who have gone through hard times, which I think is everybody, and traumatized people, myself included in that, I don't know what your background is, but for us, things have gone really, really bad at some point in our life. So we are trying to remain safe. And by always jumping to the bad scenario, we're able to in some way feel safe within, because if something bad happened, it's like we were expecting it, so it wouldn't hit us so hard. So we may remain feeling kind of yucky, but in a way we feel safe in that yuckiness, if that makes sense. But we obviously don't want to feel that way. We don't heal to feel yucky. We heal because we feel how that healing and that inner work improves our lives, how we can create that inner safety and an inner sense of peace one step at a time. And so for you, I think it's really important for you to ask yourself what the fears are that are arising. Why are you so afraid of things to be too good to be true? And why do you struggle with the unpredictable element of life? It's going to be a different answer for everybody. For you, I was wondering if when the COVID-19 pandemic happened, if that was very shocking for you, if that was shocking for your nervous system in some way, and if all these things that happened afterwards just felt like knife wounds, like stab, 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 for lack of a better phrase. And if that experience was a bit traumatizing for you, if this snowball effect of painful experiences is something that you're still afraid of happening again, and if you just need to offer yourself more love and compassion for going through that. Because I also found on my own healing journey, I often go back to childhood when healing. I believe in childhood wounds and inner child work. I talk about that a lot on the podcast. But many of the experiences we have today are triggered by something that goes farther back than the present moment. But I also have found that I've been wounded in my 20s and in my 30s. And as you mentioned with the COVID-19 pandemic, I had to be with that version of myself. I was 28 in 2020 when the world changed. And I have had to do my own healing around that and grieving of where I thought life would go and where my life is now and how I'll never get back those crazy years. And I share that because maybe there's a part of you that's still afraid or still holding on to something that you're ready to let go of in regards to those past 5 years. And one way that I recommend for letting go is to spend some intentional time. I call it ceremony time, but you can call it whatever you want. And finding a place in nature or finding some quiet time in solitude and just honoring the last 5 years you went through, honoring who you were before and honoring who you are now, and seeing that growth and reassuring yourself that you have grown and that you have your own back and that you are a different person who, if something happens again, that you have new tools to deal with that. You have been on a journey of growth, and it's important to remind yourself of that. That if something unpredictable happens, you are not who you were the last time an unpredictable thing happened, or you're not who you were 5 years ago, 10 years ago, or maybe your unpredictable wound goes back to childhood and you are a different person now. And it is so important when healing to remind ourselves that and to reassure those versions of us within. That's how I always view it. When I feel fear and panic come up, one of the first things I do is I'm like, is this present me or is this another age? And I sit in meditation and I allow that age to come forward. I hope that makes sense. But oftentimes a part of me needs reassurance. A part of me who has very real fears, has been very wounded, needs me to reassure them that I am here, I am a safe person, and I am capable of protecting them and also capable of that resilience and that strength we talked about at the beginning of the episode. Because you are a resilient person, you are a strong person. If you are here listening to this podcast, you have a growth mindset, and that is incredible. That's amazing. You have the tools. You just may not always know it in the moment, but you do have the tools. And if you don't have the tools right now, you have the capability of finding the tools that will help you along the way. I assure you of that. After everything I've been through, I have time and time again found exactly what I needed to help me through the toughest times of my life. It's not always easy and it's not always overnight, but it's through that perseverance we mentioned that we're able to continually find what we need and to continually move forward and reassure ourselves that things are going to be okay. Life is unpredictable. And the other thing I wanted to mention here with your question is I'm wondering if your anxiety, your overwhelm, and your fear are connected to you feeling like you need to be in control. Because when we are trying to control life, that is when we can't allow life to be as good as life can get. Because when we try to control things, we are trying to keep ourselves safe inherently. Because if we're controlling life, life is predictable. And when life is predictable, we feel safe. We feel protected. We feel like we have life on a leash is how I'm viewing it. Like life is a dog. You have it on a leash when you're in control. But when we let go of control, it's like a dog off the leash. And the dog's like, follow me, follow me. And the dog is all happy. And you're like, oh my God, you terrify me, dog. Where are you going? Ah! That's the visual that came to my mind. But what you'll find if you follow the happy-go-lucky dog with off the leash is that dog, aka life, is going to teach you how to let go of control because you are not in control of life. If you learned anything over the past 5 years, my guess is one thing you learned is that you are not in control. Life has a funny way of knocking us down when we try to control it. And part of learning to be present with life and enjoying the present moment is not attaching to really anything. You don't want to attach to the really good times and you don't want to attach to the really bad times. And by living in the past and living in fear and anxiety, It sounds like you're attached to that fear. And we want to begin to let go of that fear, because the more you let go of the fear, the more you will enjoy the present moment. Because I want you to enjoy your new job, enjoy your new home, enjoy your new friends. But these anxieties and these fears are just showing you that you're in uncharted territory and you're likely trying to control life still. And as you are that butterfly coming out of the cocoon that we talked about, you have to learn how to dance with life in a new way. And now you might be thinking, Amanda, that sounds all good and dandy, but how do I do that? It's going to be different for everybody, but one thing you can begin to do is to bring more awareness and more compassion to these hard feelings you're having. Your anxiety, your overwhelm, and your fear are not there to punish you. They're there to show you what you are afraid of so that you can overcome that fear. You can look at that fear. You can see where that fear really originated from. But I find that anxiety, especially anxiety around the idea of things being too good to be true, that anxiety is just showing us that we are uncomfortable with this new way of being. We're uncomfortable. And I think that's part of life. I believe we're always going to come across discomfort. And I think we're always going to hit fear, because both these things arise when we do something new. And the only way you'll stop feeling uncomfortable and you'll stop having fear, in my opinion, is if you stop doing new things, if you stop growing. And the older I get, I'm like, why else are we here? Aren't we here to grow, to love, to learn, to live life to the fullest? And that involves getting uncomfortable. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with the way you're feeling. So I wanted to offer you that, because how do you begin navigating these hard feelings? You reassure yourself that there's nothing wrong with the way you're feeling. You let go of those inner judgments. We want to stop judging ourselves, and we want to become curious with ourselves. Curiosity has a compassionate tone to it. It also has a playful tone to it. I think so many humans want certainty, but life is never certain. We are thrown into uncertainty the more we embrace life and the more we allow life to guide us. I think that so many times we're asked to take a leap of faith before we are certain of the outcome. That is terrifying. That triggers anxiety and overwhelm. You are in a period of goodness, I view it. You're getting the fruits of your labor. You have worked hard to be where you are. How do you allow yourself to enjoy it? You reassure yourself that you deserve where you are. Because also, when we fear the too good to be true, it's an unworthiness wound. We're like, am I worthy of this much goodness? There's often a part of us that thinks we don't deserve life to be that good. So that's why we struggle to believe life can be that good. And it's this cycle of unworthiness and not feeling like we're enough. And so if we don't think we're worthy of the goodness and we don't think we're enough for that, we will just punish ourselves and throw ourselves in a cycle of negative thoughts or anxious thoughts, because we are hitting that upper limit Gay Hendricks talks about, or we're hitting that belief about ourselves. We're hitting a belief about how good life can be. You know, that happens in my life all the time. When things get really good, I get really triggered. I relate to this question. I'm not saying any of this is easy. I can struggle with anxiety myself. The more I lean into the things I enjoy, the more anxious I can become, for sure. It's a real human behavior that when things get good, we can malfunction, is how I view it. My brain's like, cannot compute so much goodness. And it like breaks. It's crazy. It's crazy. It really is. It's crazy. And if you take anything from this episode, I hope it's that you can soften around yourself, because what tends to happen, and what I kind of see in your question, is that we begin to get really stressed and judgmental of ourselves when things aren't going well or not going how we thought they would. We judge ourselves for it. And as you mentioned, life is unpredictable, and it's about, as I said, getting curious with yourself. I'm uncomfortable here. What is triggered? Why am I feeling this way? Why can't I allow myself to be happy? And sometimes it'll be an easy answer. Like, oh, that's just an old way of being. I'm ready to let that go. And sometimes the answer will be something much deeper, and it'll be a really painful truth. And we'll be like, ooh, I don't want to look at that. Or, ooh, I didn't think that was still there. But as I hope you have learned through your own healing journey, the more we process the past, the more we become friends with our feelings, the more we're able to dance with life rather than fight life. Because when we try to control life, or when we fear life, or when we get really judgmental and stressed, we're fighting life. And spoiler alert, life is always going to win. Life is a force that is much more powerful than our human minds and our human selves. And the more we can begin to soften to life, which is just letting go of that control we've talked about and letting go of attachment to the outcome of things, the more we're able to appreciate the present moment. And so, for you with this question, I think that one, be kind to yourself. Be kind to yourself. You did go through a rough 5 years. It may take some more time for you to trust life again. You're rebuilding trust with life. That's also what happens when this too good to be true wound comes up, is that life wasn't good and you're stepping out of your comfort zone and you're like, life, do you have my back? Like, what is happening here? And when we're rebuilding trust with life, we're really rebuilding trust with ourselves. And as you mentioned, life can be unpredictable. But what we learn through that unpredictability is how to have our own back, how to have that strength, that courage, and that perseverance to continue to move forward no matter what life throws at us. I also invite you to practice meditation. I think meditation is a beautiful practice. And when I say meditation, I'm really talking about sitting and contemplating a question. So, my form of meditation is sitting down and quiet. Sometimes I use a guided meditation, sometimes I don't, but really sitting down, getting to that still place within through breath and dropping in a question and allowing myself to see what arises. That may be confusing for some people, but it's a practice. And the more we are able to be with ourselves and to be still with ourselves and to be quiet with ourselves, the more we're able to get to the truth of how we're feeling. And if meditation is not your thing, I recommend journaling. I think you can have a question. So, say the question is, why do I fear everything going away? Why do I fear everything falling apart? And allowing yourself to free write that answer. And just keep writing. You'll surprise yourself with what comes up. That's what I find time and time again when we free write journal, not when we stay in the mind and we think, what is that? No, you put your pen on the page and you just keep writing. And when we allow that free write to come through, so often the answer can surprise us. When you're feeling really overwhelmed and anxious, I also recommend you go out in nature. Nature is so healing. I know it's winter. At least when I'm recording this episode, it's winter for most people. I live in Arizona, so my winter is honestly the summer when it's 120 degrees out and I can't go outside. So I can go outside now, but come 6 months from now, we will see how sane I am when I can't go outside so much. But finding ways to relax your body. So when we are anxious, overwhelmed, and fearful, it is finding ways to regulate your nervous system, to calm down, and to reassure yourself you are safe. Because that is what I see here. The fear that keeps arising for you is that you don't feel safe because you went through a time in your life where it didn't feel safe. You lost a lot of things. And that's why, as I mentioned earlier, there may be a grieving process that goes on because you may have not fully allowed yourself to grieve what those 5 years were like for you. Sometimes when we're in the midst of a period, it's not till after it that we can grieve it, or after it that we can see it clearly, because especially when we're on the healing journey, sometimes things are really, really hard and we're healing in the moment, something from the past. And then when we move forward, we have to heal that moment, if that makes sense. You know, for me, for an example in my life is I lived with PTSD for a very long time. And when I stopped having PTSD, at first it was like, oh my gosh, I don't have PTSD anymore. But then when I stopped having PTSD, after a couple weeks, I then saw how much that PTSD had impacted my life in a way I wasn't able to see when I was in the midst of it. When I was in the midst of it, I couldn't see the devastating impact that reliving the most horrible things in my life had on me. And when I stopped having PTSD, then I had to go through a whole grieving process about those years where I lived with PTSD. And it's a very confusing cycle, and sometimes it feels like it will never end. But with each layer and with each step, we gain more inner freedom, is how I view it. We're liberated from those difficult feelings, and we learn how to process things in our own unique way. Because as I mentioned meditation, journaling, nature. I also love baths. I think those are great. And finding a creative element to help you heal. But I mentioned all those things, but for each person, it's going to be individual. You're going to find what helps you process things. You're going to find what helps you move through your own inner world. You're going to find what works best for you. And that's why I wish I had all the answers, but I don't. Because I don't know your past, I don't know your present, and I don't know where you're going. Spoiler alert with that one, nobody knows where we're going. We can all think we know where we're going, but That's part of the letting go of control, is that we really don't know what's around the corner, which is why we fear the shoe dropping. But at every moment in time, we can either choose fear or choose love. But what I mean by choose love is we can choose trust and we can choose faith that no matter what's around the corner, we got this. We got our back. We've learned and we've grown and we have the tools moving forward. And if we don't have them, we'll find them. And in each moment, we can choose to feel unsupported by life because it's so unpredictable, that's so scary. Or we can choose to feel supported by life and to know that life is a ride. It's not a straight line. It's not linear. It's filled with loops and curls and ups and downs. And sometimes in the moment, it's incredibly challenging. But it's down the line that we get to see our strength. We get to see our bravery. We get to see the things we overcame. And from overcoming challenges is where we build our self-esteem, is where we build self-respect, is where we build self-love for ourselves. It's truly where we learn to love ourselves because we learn that we're not perfect and we pull ourselves off this pedestal we'll never reach. And we learn to love ourselves right here, right now, and to be kind to ourselves. So many of us grew up in critical environments or neglectful environments or environments where we never felt good enough or worthy enough. And it's through these challenging moments, or it's through these moments that feel too good to be true, where we get to step up to the plate and we get to reparent ourselves, or we get to be our own best friend, and we get to reassure ourselves that we got this. Because you do. You do have this. I know it doesn't always feel like that. I know your feelings can feel overwhelming. I relate to overwhelming feelings. God, do I relate to overwhelming feelings. But time and time again, it's slowing down and just being kind to myself, where I realize that the anxiety and the fear I'm feeling are just that, anxiety and fear. And that they're often teaching me something that I'm afraid of, but that they don't have to run the show and they can take a back seat. And they're able to take a back seat the more I see myself, the more I show up for myself, the more I love myself. I hope something in this answer was helpful. I know I didn't have any concrete advice, so I do hope something in this answer was helpful. And if anything, I hope you take that you are not alone. There is nothing wrong with how you're feeling. It is part of the human journey to be uncomfortable when things are really good. And if you need a little permission today, I want to give you permission to lean into feeling good. And I am rooting for you and your success and your happiness because dang, you deserve it. I hope something in the answer was helpful. Thank you so much for this question. Thank you for joining me for another episode of New View Advice and for having this conversation about why do we fear when things are too good to be true. If you haven't already, I invite you to rate and subscribe to the podcast. Ratings and reviews help to bring more people to the podcast and help me to continue to grow, which is my goal for 2025. So if you enjoyed this episode, I invite you to rate and review the podcast. Thank you again for joining me for another episode of New View Advice. As always, I hope I was able to offer you a new view on whatever you may be going through. Sending you all my love. See you next time.